Welcome back to the deep dive. So, today we are tackling something, well, it's one of the biggest headaches in corporate life, I think. You're leading a huge cross functional project, but you don't control the budget, you don't manage the teams doing the work, and you definitely don't have the authority to tell, say, the compliance department what to do. If that sounds familiar, this deep dive is for you. It's for anyone who has to drive a big outcome while, navigating all those political currents. Our topic is pure influence without authority, and our mission today is pretty straightforward. We want to pull out some systematic, practical tools for finding, mapping, and strategically engaging with the people who can make or break your project, the stakeholders.
This is such a critical topic. I
Yeah.
mean, people often treat stakeholder management like it's some kind of soft skill. It's not. It's really more of an engineering discipline. To ground us, let's just assign them simply, a stakeholder is, well, it's any person or group who can affect your project's outcome or who's affected by it. And why go through all this trouble? Because the payoff is massive. Good stakeholder work reduces your execution risk because you find problems early. It actually improves your final product because you're getting all these diverse expert views, and it speeds up delivery, which is surprising to some because you build this sense of shared ownership instead of just fighting with other teams. And most importantly, it secures resources. It ties your work to the big picture goals. If you don't do this, you're flying blind.
I love that. Strategic, not soft. Okay, let's get into it. The biggest fear is always the blind spot, right? That one person you totally forgot to talk to who then blows everything up in the final week because they felt ignored. So how do we make sure we don't miss those people?
You need a system. You need lenses. Otherwise, you just default to the org chart, and that's never the full picture.
Yeah.
Our sources point to four really essential lenses. First, the organizational one. This is the easy one. The hierarchy, your executive sponsors, budget owners, the managers of the teams you need.
The usual suspect.
Exactly. Second is the functional lens. This is everyone outside your core team. So engineering, design, but also, and this is key, departments like finance, legal, compliance, security. You have to ask, who has veto power here?
That makes so much sense. We always focus on who we report to, not who, has to actually support the thing once it's live.
Precisely. The third lens is external. Your customers, of course, key vendors, regulators, any advisory boards you might have. And the fourth is the life cycle lens. This one's about timing. Who's critical during discovery? Who only really matters at launch or for the long-term support phase? They're not all the same.
That's a great list, but the sources point to a fifth lens, and I think this is where it gets really interesting. It's the influence chain. It's not enough to know who the stakeholders are. You have to figure out who they listen to.
That's the gold mine. It really is. If your main stakeholder is skeptical, who do they trust? Is it a peer, a technical advisor they rely on, maybe someone on their operational team? That person might seem low power for your project, but they have huge power in convincing the person you actually need on board. And to make sure you've covered all your bases, just run through a few quick questions. Ask the team, who approves the final scope or the money? Who gives us the data or the systems we need to use? And my favorite, who gets woken up at 3 a.m. to fix this thing when it breaks? If you can answer those, you're probably in good shape.
Okay, so we've used our 5 lenses. We have this this huge list of, let's say, 30 names. You can't give all 30 people the same level of attention. It's just not possible. So the next move has to be mapping them out, right? To prioritize our energy.
It's exactly. Prioritization is everything. The classic tool for this is the power interest grid. It's simple. You map each person on 2 axes. How much power they have to influence the project and how much interest they have in its outcome. This gives you 4 groups. Each one needs a totally different engagement strategy. Your high-power, high-interest people, these are your key sponsors, your partners. You need to collaborate closely with them. We're talking frequent two-way communication. You pull them into problem solving.
Okay, that's clear. But what about the leader who, controls a huge budget, but their team isn't really involved? The high power but low interest person, they could still kill the project.
Yep. For them, the strategy is keep satisfied. They don't want all the details. They just want to feel confident and not surprised. Give them short, crisp summaries. Here's our progress. Here are the big risks, and here's how we're handling them. That's it. Respect their time. Then you've got the low-power, high-interest crowd. Think of the actual end users or the frontline support staff. They care a lot, but they can't make the final decision. You keep informed. You share detailed plans. You ask for their feedback on things that affect them, like usability. They are your source of ground truth. And last, Low power, low interest. These are people on the periphery. You just monitor them, maybe with a quarterly newsletter or some other lightweight automated update. Don't waste energy here.
That's such a clean way to triage. But you also mentioned the salience model, which adds another layer. It goes beyond just power and interest. It adds, what is it, two more dimensions?
It does. It gives you a bit more nuance. It looks at three things: power, which we know, legitimacy, and urgency. Urgency is pretty clear. Is their claim on your time sensitive? Do they need an answer right now? But legitimacy is the interesting one. It's not just about formal authority. It's the perceived validity of their involvement. Security engineer might not have the CEO's power, but they have the legitimacy, the mandate to stop a deployment because of policy. So the more of those three things a stakeholder has, power, legitimacy, urgency, the higher up they go on your priority list.
That makes the whole process so much more actionable. And then you do the engagement gap assessment. You figure out where they are now, like unaware or supportive, and where you need them to be, maybe leading a certain work stream. And that gap, that becomes your to-do list for the week.
All right, so we've identified and mapped the territory. Now for the core skill, the actual influencing. The whole idea of this deep dive is that real influence comes from clarity, trust, and value. It's got nothing to do with your job title. Absolutely. And the foundational tactic here is creating a shared purpose. You can't just pitch your project's features. You have to translate its benefits into the language of each stakeholder. You have to connect it to their goals. So for example, your project is a new data pipeline. To the security team, you don't talk about data. You frame it as risk reduction through better auditing. To sales, it's about improving the win rate because it enables a feature they've been asking for. To the support team, it's ticket deflection. The new data will auto-resolve common customer problems. When you solve their problems, you get their attention.
But what if their goals are in direct conflict? Let's say finance needs to cut costs, but engineering needs to spend time and money on a re-architecture for stability. Those are opposites.
You call it out. You acknowledge the tension directly and frame the choice as a trade-off we have to make to hit the bigger goal, which is usually something like serving the customer or winning a market. Influence isn't about getting rid of conflict. It's about managing it openly.
I really appreciate that honesty. Okay, tactic 2, building credibility through execution. This sounds like just being reliable.
It is. It's about being boringly reliable. You do the small things you said you do. You share updates when things are going badly, not just when they're good. And, this is critical, you admit mistakes early. And you immediately follow it up with, and here's what we're doing about it. People trust leaders who are transparent, even with bad news.
That flows right into tactic 3, which I think is a total game changer. The power of pre-alignment. Why is it so important to have those little one-on-ones before the big meeting?
Because group meetings are terrible places for surprises. If you drop bad news or a tough decision on a high-power person in front of their peers, their only option is to get defensive. Pre-alignment, a quick chat, a short pre-read document, lets them process, ask questions, and raise objections privately. They walk into the big meeting already on board, or at least ready to have a constructive debate. No surprises means no derailments.
Which makes tactic 4, framing and negotiation, so much easier. When you have to make that tough call, you frame it with the constraints out in the open. And you use what the sources call calibrated questions. So don't ask, can we cut this feature? Ask, given that compliance needs X by the deadline, which of these other 2 features would you prefer we delay? Or, what's the biggest risk the solution removes for your team, knowing it will cost us Y? It shifts the conversation from a yes-no to a shared problem.
And when that real conflict does happen, tactic 5 is just vital. You have to distinguish between someone's interest and their position. Their position is what they demand. I need feature Z launched by Monday. That's the position. But their underlying interest might be something else entirely. Maybe I'm worried about my team's metrics for our quarterly review, or I'm anxious about a weekend deployment. Hey, your job is to uncover that underlying interest, the real why, and then offer different options that can meet that need. Maybe a beta release on Monday satisfies the optics, even if the full launch is still on Tuesday.
That's a perfect example. And finally, tactic 6 wraps up with reciprocity and coalition building.
It's pretty straightforward. Influence is a two-way street. Find small ways to help other people hit their goals. That builds up your social capital. At the same time, you're securing formal sponsors and building a network of champions across different teams. They'll advocate for you in the meetings you're not even in. So all this work, it's not just a one-off. It requires a process, a rhythm. The key tool here is a living stakeholder engagement plan. It's not a static list you make once. It's a live document. It tracks what they care about, their current stance, where you want them to be, and how often you're going to communicate with them. You should be looking at it every single week.
And that communication needs a real structure. You need a simple matrix. Executive sponsors get a high-level, brief readout every 2 weeks. The wider team, that's high interest but low power. They get a detailed written update every week. The format and the frequency have to match the power and interest grid we talked about earlier.
And those meetings, those syncs, are not just for updates. They're where you build or lose influence. The mechanics matter. Always start by stating the decision you need to get out of the meeting. Time box every agenda item and be ruthless about it. And always end with clear action items. Who owns it and by when. People lose trust when they feel their time is wasted.
And the heartbeat of all this is the structured weekly sync. It needs a strict one-page pre-read sent out hours beforehand, no excuses. And the agenda is sacred. You start with 5 minutes on progress, highlights only, then 10 minutes on risks and blockers, but only the top 3. And you have to come with proposed solutions, not just problems. The core of the meeting is 10 minutes for decisions required. Each one is framed as a question, with the options and data already in the pre-read, and you wrap with 3 minutes on actions and owners. Who does what, by when, done.
And that structure helps you avoid the classic pitfalls. Pitfall 1, you missed the real decision maker. We solved that with the influence chain. Pitfall 2, vague goals. Everything needs to be a measurable target with a date. And the third and most common one is just holding meetings where no decisions get made. If you're calling a meeting, you have to state the decision you're after up front. It forces clarity.
So wrapping this all up, what's the big takeaway? Stakeholder alignment isn't a task you check off a list. It's this continuous strategic process that really drives the work forward. Influence without authority, it really comes down to preparation mapping, the territory empathy so you can speak their language, and a consistent, disciplined communication rhythm. If you remember anything, remember the power of the pre-rate and the difference between a position and an interest.
Right. We talked a lot about how to prioritize, how to focus on the high-power people and spend minimal effort on the low-power, low-interest group. But that brings up a really interesting question for you to think about. When is the risk of over-informing or over-engaging those low-power stakeholders actually acceptable? What's the long-term value in that kind of broad transparency? Is building that generalized, proactive trust worth the extra effort, even if it doesn't map directly to your project success metrics? Something to mull over.
That's a powerful thought to end on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into influence without authority. We'll catch you next time.